welcome to another edition of The Grapevine. We're switching up the format a bit this week, so we've got a great guest, Mike Taylor. I'm going to let Mike introduce himself in a minute. So what we're going to do today is, me and Mike have already had a chat, we've already recorded that, so in a second we're going to hop over to that interview with Mike, give you that in its entirety, and then after that I'm going to come back, I'm going to bring Ed into the conversation, and then we're going to sort of give some behavioral science and marketing sites commentary on top of that. So, listen to the interview first, and then we'll come back and you'll hear from me and Ed. Hey, Mike, how are you?
Hey, good, thanks.
Good stuff. Look, thanks for joining. Before we jump into a bunch of questions, it'd be really good to hear from the horse's mouth, so to say, about you. So just can you give us, 30 seconds, a couple of minutes, just who you are, what you're into, just to kind of warm everyone up to the conversation we're about to have.
Yeah, sure. To get a laugh, I usually describe myself as a recovering agency owner.
Nice.
I co-founded and built an agency called Ladder. It was a performance marketing, growth hacking agency. Put in a lot of hours. Grew it to 50 people, got burned out, and then left and messed around for a couple of years during COVID. So I'm now putting my time towards something productive, which is working on a book on marketing memetics, which I think is like why we were initially interested in talking, because I think a lot of crossover between what I'm writing about and what you guys do.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, great. I love that. Recovering agency owner. I think there's going to be a lot of
Takes a
people
lot of
who
recovery. I feel I'm like mostly on the right path now.
yeah. So, do you feel recovered now? Are you tempted to start another one, or?
Oh yeah, every now and again I get the inkling, but then I remind myself of the pain.
That's all right. Well, today we won't talk about agencies. We'll talk about memetics, and I think probably a good place to start is firstly, am I pronouncing it right? Memetics.
Memetics, yeah, M-E. Yeah, there's also
Okay.
mimetics, which I talk about in the
Yeah.
book, which is something related but different.
Okay. So memetics. What is it?
Yeah, so you've obviously heard of memes, right? Like internet memes, but the word actually comes pre-internet. It was coined in 1976. It comes from biology. So really, it means any shared unit of culture. So it doesn't have to be like a funny viral image. It could be, I don't know, the map I have on my wall, or your logo is a meme, right? If you go in a coffee shop and you kind of see exposed wood, or those Edison light bulbs that dangle from the ceiling, if it's like a hipster coffee shop,
Okay.
those are all memes, right? And even the kind of words we use, like the phrases we use in marketing, they're all memes as well, because they get copied from person to person or from brand to brand. You sometimes intentionally because it's part of the brand that you're forming, but also randomly through evolution as well. So ideas evolve just as well as genes do. So memetics is really the study of that, and kind of figuring out. Once you see the world in that way, how can you affect what memes get remembered? What brands kind of succeed, and kind of so on and so forth. So it's really a word that I've been able to put onto like a lot of activities that I was doing in the agency, and I had no idea that I was doing something intelligent. I was just me trying to survive. And once I heard about memetics and kind of started to read more about how these things can be applied, then I was like, oh, this is now finally a label for what I was doing.
Yeah, awesome. So then, bringing that to life, then, where does that sit as part of what we do as marketers? Like, is it very much just in the creative space? And you've talked about images and objects in that way, or actually does it sit across the team broader? Like, who would you be giving it to if you could
Mm.
package up the metrics in a marketing team? Who would that box go to?
Yeah, good question. So I always imagine this as basically the thing you can hand to your person running your ads, because we were running a lot of ads, and you find now that pretty much the only lever left is just optimizing the creative, because pretty much everything else has been automated, right? There's a lot of targeting. I know you guys are doing some pretty special targeting, but yeah, I think like the vast majority of the control has been taken away on Meta and Google, and really, they just want you to upload the creative and see what, kind of see which one works. So this was really, a reaction to that taking away of control, because if you don't, like if you're using these tools to the effect, like if you're using all the kind of automatic optimization you get from Meta and Google, you don't actually get to split test anything anymore either. Like it's pretty rare that you can actually run a split test, and it takes a lot of setup and a lot of observations that cost money, right? And none of my data-driven people on my team were like they didn't have any clue like what brand was, like how to do, how to come up with creative that was actually going to work, even if you can't test it, right? Like if they couldn't test it, they had no idea how to decide. So this is that guide that I want to give to them and say like, hey, like, this is how you make data-driven decisions and kind of look for patterns in the data, but without being able to test it.
Okay, so really, this whole thing is giving a framework to measure measure the creative in a more structured way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, well, it's not necessarily measuring the creative after the fact. It's more kind of deciding what creative to use in the first place. Because I think like, attribution is a whole other topic that we could probably talk all day about.
Let's leave that lid closed for now.
Yeah, that's a hairy topic. But yeah, I think how do you know what creative to run in your first campaign, right? How do you, like, when you actually can't test it or your attribution isn't very good, how do you make sure you're using kind of like a good enough ad to start with? I think that's actually a bigger question, because most of the creative decisions we make for our brands, and we don't actually have any data to support it. It's just based on opinion on the thousands of things we've seen in our past. And a lot of what I realized was if you just scale up the number of things that you see, you can start to see more patterns, and then it becomes a bit more obvious as to what sorts of attributes you should choose, like what sorts of words you should choose, etc.
Now, without trying to condense your book, which has taken a long time to write, into a 2-second answer, but like it's a great point you raised there. For let's take newer businesses when they don't have an idea. Like, how do you go about applying this? Just take a new business to decide what that initial creative is. Is it as simple as open your mind up and go out and see more stuff, or is there another way that we should be thinking?
Yeah, so actually, I saw an example of this in the wild. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was Tim Ferriss' podcast, had James Clear on. So he wrote Atomic Habits, right? And when he was talking about how he came up with the title, I was like, oh, that's meme mapping. So I like now I kind of use his example because it's more visceral. But yeah, so he so the way he looked at the title was he made a copy of basically like, it was like 150 nonfiction books he looked at that had sold more than 1 million copies. And then he just looked at like what are the patterns in the titles. So one of the things he found was the blank of blank. It was like the War of Art, the Psychology of Money, like the Power of Habit. Like there's tons and tons of books that fit that template. So that is like a meme, right? That itself, like the blank of blank, is a meme. And you're much more likely to have a best-selling book like if you use that template. The one he used for Atomic Habits wasn't specifically that template. It was the second most popular one. But it's basically you combine two words together. Like the second word is the topic of your book, which is habits for him. And the first word is a descriptor that's not normally assigned to that topic, right? So I mean, it kind of works, right? Like, atomic habits, like it's not normally, the habits are not normally described as atomic, right? Like the other examples he used, I think, were like Jocko Willink. He also, I think, a guest on Tim Ferriss. He has extreme ownership, right? Like ownership is not normally extreme, right? And then there was like Cal Newport. So he had deep work. Like work is not normally deep, right? It's not really described as deep usually. So yeah, I just thought that was really like an enlightening way to to show this. But I think the key insight here is that most people would choose the title this way, just based on their experience, right? But what he did is kind of that extra step, which is he compiled that whole list of 150 titles, and then he got to see the patterns that maybe he hadn't already experienced. And basically, by kind of broadening out your experience, you can really be a much more data-driven with the way that you choose. You can kind of make these creative decisions that can't, very easily be created tested.
Yeah, I love it. And the immediate thing there is that it feels like there's a big overlap with behavioral science.
Yeah,
We talk about our system one and our system two brain, and fundamentally, our brain doesn't like to do work, right? Because you doing work burns calories. From an evolutionary point of view,
yeah,
we didn't have lots of calories, so it's how can I just do things easily? And what they're almost hooking into there is like how can we make people like our book without having to think
yeah,
if it's going to
exactly,
be a
yeah,
good book. Um,
yeah.
where do you see where do you, or do you, I guess is probably the actual question rather than leading you. Like, is there a crossover in your mind between memetics and behavioral science?
Oh yeah, huge. Actually, I quote a lot of behavioral science in the book.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, like memetics is really kind of both using behavioral science and also fighting against it, right? So
Yeah.
it's also kind of trying to break out your own psychology. Your brain doesn't know what a New York bestseller is, right? Like it wasn't evolved to generate New York Times bestsellers. So your brain just thinks, let's shortcut this. Let's not do the work. Let's just come up with a title, right? And like what James Clear is doing, I think, is kind of forcing his brain to do that work, like kind of wrestling one system over another in a way. Kind of it is actually worth burning a lot of calories to if you're even going to increase your sales by 10% or 20% or maybe 100,000% in James Clear's case.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. And then you kind of said something there that was interesting, and I guess as a broader point, this is about doing something that's hard to measure.
Yeah.
Um, how do we measure? Like, is there a way to measure that this is working, or is that the wrong way to look at it? Like, is that keeping me in sort of old world thinking?
Yeah, I mean it's tough, right? Because it's correlation, not causation.
Mm.
There was like a really good XKCD comic once I saw was said correlation isn't causation, but it winks furtively at you, something like that. But it's like yes, like correlation isn't causation, but I think what we're finding with like machine learning and all the kind of advancements in AI is that like if you throw enough correlations in there and stir the pot, like you will get like something that like is very useful from a causal point of view. So like nothing like nothing we're doing with Chat GPT, right, is based on A/B testing, right? It's they just trained it on lots and lots and lots of examples to the point where it gets very very good at coming up with good examples, right? And I think that a lot of people see that as a bug of human behavior. And I actually think a lot of the things we describe as bugs are really just kind of researchers not thinking through how unique the human condition is. Right? Like there's in behavioral science, there's this concept of ergodicity. I don't know if you're familiar. Like Nicholas Taleb talks about it a lot, right? So if you had a bet that was like a 1 in 6 chance of earning $1 million, you would take that bet. It's a very good bet, right? But then like if it was if it was say it was like Russian roulette, right? There's a 1 in 6 chance of dying in there as well. So like one of the barrels was $1 million, one of the barrels was an actual bullet. Then nobody would ever play that game because if you play the game and lose, you lose all future games, right?
Yeah.
So you might kind of bet on the outcome of that game, but if you're in the game yourself, it changes your bet, right? So I think that economists would kind of, I mean, I studied economics, right? Did a master's in it, but like economists would say that a lot of human behavior is irrational, but actually I think that it's only kind of irrational if you if you ignore the context in which the decisions are being made. Like if you have perfect information for every decision, if you can A/B test everything, then of course like you would prefer to, but most of us don't have that luxury.
Yeah, precisely. And also, I think, and this is something that we talk about a lot, in that people are trying to get perfect information, to your point about human beings that exhibit non-perfect behavior patterns, right?
Yeah.
You can try your hardest to predict, and on a large scale, it starts to maybe follow some trends, but trying to work out what an individual is going to do, or what all individuals are going to do at every single moment, is just not frankly going to happen until we become more routine than we are. It's just not how we exist as humans. And I loved your point about the kind of the bug with a lot of these AI systems, or what we perceive as bugs. And there's a chap called Stuart Russell. He's very influential in the community. He did this year's Radio 4's Reith lectures, but he does a lot in the world. And one of his big points he's moving to now is, how do we make some of these models, um, rather than, if we haven't told them about something, assume that it's not important, get them to ask. And
Mm.
one of his a great example, he says, if they tried to train an AI system to stop global warming,
Hmm.
its first thing to do, if we didn't put any what things we would assume that by doing that, don't kill all human beings, right?
Yeah.
But if you forget to put that in, which most of us that would be an assumption, of course they wouldn't do that. Its probably most logical thing would be to exterminate the human race, right? Because we are
Yeah,
the
yeah.
ones, and it's just an interesting how that world is switching to, we're not always going to get in all the things we need in there. So it's not always going to give the answers that we want, but we have to take that time. But anyway, sorry,
Yeah, like
check.
I think a lot of this AI alignment stuff is actually kind of interesting because I always ask the question, well, have we aligned humans to do that? And if we
Yeah,
haven't, then how are we gonna, what hope in hell do we have of aligning AI to? It's
yeah,
I mean, as AI gets as intelligent as humans, we're gonna have just as many problems. Like management science is still a thing, right? Like we haven't figured out how to fully manage humans, so like, are we really going to figure out how to manage AI? No, but like we also can be very very productive even with like slightly misaligned AI.
yeah, yeah. Great point. Switching it a little bit, I was reading one of your essays and I loved it. It was called Mimetic Desire,
Yeah. So
and
that's Memetics. That's the one with the I. So it's a yeah. So
okay, well, all
yeah,
right,
no,
we'll
but I
make
mean
this.
it's obviously really related. So it's super interesting.
We'll make it a two-part question, because I read that and I was
Yeah.
like, well, that actually, there feels like a big overlap here with word of mouth and influence. Like, it was talking about a
Yep.
lot of the similar concepts. So I think the first thing is, let's split apart mimetrics with an I
Yeah.
and
Memetics. Yeah.
mimetrics with an
And
E.
Memetics.
Memetics, sorry. Yeah, let's split apart what the difference is, and it'd be just interesting to talk about that. So it's quite an interesting concept.
Yeah, so memetics with an E comes from biology, right? And it was Richard Dawkins that coined it in Selfish Gene. He coined that term, and he was really only preoccupied with like what was being shared, right? So like what are the different kind of visual cues or phrases or whatever that kind of get copied and imitated and passed on, and what ideas evolve. Mimetics actually comes from a completely different source. It's actually they use the same root word, same like Greek word, which is why they sound similar. But it was Rene Girard who he's actually kind of most famous for having a very famous student in his class, which was Peter Thiel. Of
There we
Silicon
go.
Valley kind
Okay.
of fame. So, and
Yeah,
actually Thiel credits Girard's work for his investment in Facebook, which I think he put in 50 grand and made billions, right?
yeah.
One of the best investments. And yeah, what Girard was looking at really was he didn't care what was being transmitted; he cared who was transmitting it. And so
Mm.
his work was really about models of desire. Basically, we learn what we want based on what other people want. So the classic line, "I'll have what he's having." Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's really interesting because these things both grew up as like kind of separate lines of inquiry. But actually, I talk about it in my book. I kind of say like, you just join them together because I mean, obviously, it matters who shares the meme, right? Like if Kim Kardashian shares a new product, that's going to grow a lot more virally than if I share it. But also the memes themselves, some of them are powerful enough to create celebrities, right? So if I don't know, you invent like Sam Altman is now like becoming more of a household name after being the CEO of OpenAI. So the meme of AI, growing in significance has really kind of launched him to celebrity status, and now he can kind of use that status to promote other memes. So I mean, I think you can't really separate them, and unfortunately, both of these disciplines did try and separate them, and they both ultimately failed in that process. That's kind of one of the conjectures in my book.
That's really helped actually to bring together, I think, almost the differences in not that's probably the overlap more than differences in our two approaches because we
Yeah,
talk a lot about probably memetics. We don't label it that, but really
yeah,
we're looking at what's the network around the transmission.
hmm
And I really like the fact that memetics with an E is about what's being transmitted within there. And I think I'd agree, like, ultimately,
yeah,
well, we've worked with companies that they've had frankly bad products. So, the product is the thing that's being transmitted. And because it wasn't a good product, then who's transmitting it has faded out and died, i.e., people have stopped talking about it. Well, first
exactly, yeah,
people have talked about it and said it's not very good, and then we see a big trade off in those areas with people not buying it. On the flip side, you put a good product in there, which I guess is fair to call a meme in this context.
yeah,
And
exactly, yeah,
and that in itself generates that buzz and more groups of friends talk about it, more friends buy it.
yeah.
It's both parts, right? That doesn't work without the product, without the meme in the middle, and it doesn't work without the groups on either side doing the transmission. Otherwise, you've just got a meme floating in
Exactly,
space
yeah,
somewhere.
yeah. You can't ignore one side or the other. Like, I mean,
Yeah, love it.
like I remember talking to a lot of display, vendors and providers, and like programmatic vendors, and they would always say this like stupid line, which was like, "Oh, it doesn't matter where the ad appears as long as you're targeting the right person who's like ready to buy." And I always thought, no, of course it matters where it appears. Like, these people, if it's on
Yeah.
the New York Times website, right, that's going to be very, very different. Like the person's in a very different frame of mind versus like if they're on like some conspiracy website on
Yeah.
Blogspot. But it's funny because they would say that in work, but then they would like be like browsing celebrity gossip on their phone and stuff. So like they're of course like they understand it's different. Like what where it's being transmitted or who's transmitting it, I think makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I think it's easy for people to it's easy not to kind of necessarily think is to separate some of the theory between their own behavior. And our own behavior is a good indicator of how
Yeah,
others will behave. You know,
yeah,
we always use this when we talk to people. It's like, look, I'm sure you get recommendations from people or you've seen products that your friends have bought that have led you to think about something similar. And they're like, oh, yeah, actually, it's really common. It's just that,
yeah,
there's
yeah,
loads
yeah,
of data, but most people ignore it and think, no, no, yeah, it makes me chuckle. But um,
yeah.
so are there, are there brands that you can talk about at least that are using these principles like, actively today, or is it still kind of quite new out in the field?
Yeah, so I mean, like they wouldn't call it memetics necessarily, right? But I think that a lot of the high performing performance marketing teams are thinking about creative testing in this way, right? So if you kind of look at any presentation in the gaming space, you'll see that they're minutely dissecting. Okay, we're going to use like this type of cartoon ogre for the game, like, and we're going to put it next to this gameplay element, and then we're going to kind of see if that works. And then so they are like they test thousands of ads, in a month, and I think they're the most sophisticated on the performance marketing side. But then from a branding perspective, so my agency was incubated by BBH, just like part of the Publicis group, right? Like they're like a 30-40-year-old traditional agency. They're the first three clients for Audi, Levi's, and Johnny Walker back before when they were startups, right?
Okay.
Which is kind of nuts, but again, like when I talk to the strategists there, they would always, I'm like, how do you come up with your ideas? And they go, well, we like look at lots and lots of different things happening in the space, and then we kind of eventually like inspiration strikes, So it's so it's I think essentially a lot of people are already doing this, so they might not just be calling it that necessarily. actual organizations that are using memetics explicitly, it's kind of weird, but like military organizations. So like the U.S. military has studied memetics back since 2014 because they're kind of worried that they're losing the fight against jihadis. Like ISIS recruits a lot of people through social media, and they're kind of thinking, well, if we can kind of steer people away from these toxic memes, essentially, then maybe we can stop them becoming radical in the first place, right? So they've been studying it. Actually, like Russia uses a lot of this stuff in the way that they attack countries as well. Actually, I've ended up having to like write a lot about the Russia and Ukraine war because it's a kind of more of like an information war than a
Well, I was going to say I saw on something you wrote somewhere. I can't remember which channel it was on, but about if this was being used in the Russia-Ukraine war. Like, I'd love to. And I appreciate there's probably more in the book, but I'd love to, at a high level, to
yeah.
know. So that was a really interesting hook.
Yeah. So if you look at Russia's previous invasions, they would usually come out with something that was like, I'd call it like a memetic first strike. So they would say, they would say like give some plausible but fake reason for invading, and for the rest of the world. To kind of like anything that would make the rest of the world like less interested in caring about the latest Russian invasion, and it worked a few different times, like in Georgia, etc. But in Ukraine, it didn't work, and it was kind of an interesting use of kind of almost like memetic warfare by the US. So what they tried to do, Russia, was they said, we're invading because the Ukrainians are Nazis, right? It's maybe it's plausible. Like you can see pictures online of some Ukrainians being Nazi-like, right? You could see that of American citizens as well. It didn't work because the US actually kind of first said that Putin is going to invade, and he's going to he's going to invade under false pretenses. So they kind of almost like you can think about like. A bad meme as like a virus, right? A virus of the mind is what Dawkins called them. The US warning everyone that he was about to invade, that's kind of like a vaccination against this virus, right? Because if you know ahead of time, there's actually been studies. Like I talked to a few people at Meta, who kind of do content moderation for Facebook and Instagram, and well, they actually have found, they found this to be useful as well. If you kind of warn people of disinformation ahead of time, you can inoculate them against adopting these incorrect things, right? So the US kind of did this. That was like pretty interesting, but also they used the wrong meme. The Nazification meme, is a really bad one to use against the West in particular, because we have this thing like we call it Godwin's rule, which is that on the internet every argument leads to one side calling the other side a Nazi, right? And that's been around for a while. The really funny thing is that like Godwin, he designed that intentionally, and he called it kind of like a counter meme. Like he called it kind of an act of memetic engineering. So we all grew up on the internet. We all knew that like if someone calls the other side a Nazi, then they've discredited themselves, because we all know that trope, right? Like just if we're not shocked when someone calls someone a Nazi, because we've seen it before. So Putin kind of missed the step there, and like we might have kind of. If he'd used something else, maybe the West wouldn't have cared as much. I'm not sure they would have believed it, but or enough people would have believed it, they wouldn't have tipped the balance. But because those he kind of misplayed his hand, then cue kind of like massive Western support for Ukraine, tons and tons of armaments and money, and really you can kind of see it like a meme war in that the reality on the ground is dictated by the US funding levels and European funding levels. So really, whoever has the best memes gets, wins the war in a way. Like if Ukraine falls out of interest in the Western media, then the funding will stop. So it's been. I mean, I didn't intend to write about it. It wasn't happening when I started writing the book. But then when I saw it happening, I was like, oh wow, this is like wide scale use of the thing I'm writing about.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, and you're bang on, and President Zelensky is very good at that, right? Keeping
Yeah.
Ukraine in in the forefront of Western media and Western governments and Western citizens. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Well, I mean,
fascinating. So
like the really fascinating thing is like like a lot of people say he became the president because he played one on TV. Like he was a comedian, and so it's actually like maybe that is a good qualification for office nowadays. Like if your job is to really be able to portray the right memes, in order to get kind of support from the public to do the things you need to do, then like Ronald Reagan was an actor before becoming president. Donald Trump obviously was a celebrity first, and so yeah, maybe that is like the trend. I don't know. Maybe like being able to act is more important than acting, or whichever way around that is.
the ruling, yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's a fascinating insight. I enjoyed that. It's good. So definitely one I wanted to tick off today. Um,
No. I mean,
did
I don't. I mean, the funny thing is, like, this is a marketing book, right? But,
yeah,
but then, like, you realize that like everything is marketing, and
precisely.
then and then all marketing is memes, and you kind of go down the rabbit hole. Or at least I have.
Yeah, well, it is right. Ultimately in marketing, we're trying to influence people to take a decision favorable to our brand, right? Talk about it,
Yep.
buy our products, recommend it, whatever it might be, and some people don't like it being kind of shelled back as much as that, but that's ultimately what we're trying to do: positive influence, and that extends far beyond marketing. It's in every function of our life. Whether I'm
Yeah.
trying to get my little children to go and get me a biscuit, to
Yeah.
people trying to defend their country, and everything in
Yeah, well, I
between.
mean, we use memes in our social circles as well, right? Like, a lot of couples have specific words that they use, that only they use between each other, or we find that we like pick up things our kids say. I don't know if you've ever seen that happen, but like like my daughter will start saying something funny, that she was like, I think the recent one is like she says like, "Good morning, crocodile," and I don't know where it came from, but like now, like I've started saying it
You
as
said
well.
it, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but I mean, this is how these things spread, and that
Hmm.
it's just kind of this constant evolution where if it does something useful for you, you keep hold of it. If it doesn't, then you forget it.
Yeah. And we probably started straying into this question, um, but one of the other things I saw you were talking about in one of your essays was you quoted Byron Sharp, who talked about mental availability
Hmm.
or share of mind with Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
We've talked about the crossover in the behavioral science world, but just also where's this crossover into the marketing science world? And I say it might be that we've just spoken around that, but it feels like there's a
Yeah.
Venn diagram of those three things coming together, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think distinctive assets. That's the marketing literature that probably most specific to memetics. There's also the study of semiotics, which is like very similar to memetics actually. So semiotics study of signs and like what symbols have meaning in our society. So memes don't necessarily have to have meaning, which is like the one difference. But a lot of the practical tools used in semiotics can be also used in memetics. But yeah, I think distinctive assets, like distinctive brand assets, like Byron Sharp, like I think that's usually like the main thing that the marketing scientists latch onto.
Awesome. Mike, that's been really interesting. Like for me, like you got to tell us when's the book out and where can people get it? I think is probably the thing.
Yeah. So this is just a passion project of mine, right? So, actually the way I decided to do it was kind of funny. I just like last year I said my New Year's resolution was I'm going to write 1,000 words every week, and then I'll have a book by the end of the year, and it actually worked out. So now I'm in the editing phase. So this year I've been editing, and I'm just editing the last chapter now. So it's available for pre-order now on marketingmemetics.com, and it will be actually out next month. So I'm releasing it through Gumroad, just like kind of one of these websites
Nice.
you can use to self-publish. Planning to put it on Amazon later in the year as well, but again, a book is a collection of memes, and I really want to make sure all the right memes are in there. So I'm kind of like editing it as I go. I already sold about 100 copies, and then the people who bought those copies are then kind of giving me feedback to improve the book. So I'm kind of using the memetics process to keep the book relevant, and kind of making it as optimized for virality as possible.
Amazing, amazing. And where else can people find you if they want to sort of follow your work?
Yeah, I've got a Twitter addiction, so they'll probably find me on there. It's at hammer underscore MT.
Do you tweet as many memes as Elon Musk does?
Oh no, I could never defeat the meme lord. Yeah, no. Actually, I mostly post a lot of boring marketing stuff, but occasionally I think things go viral. I actually had a statistics webinar that I covered that had 800,000 views. Completely surprising. Yeah, I mean it's very. I mean, even knowing memetics, it's still very hard to predict what's going to work.
Yeah, there's a guy called Duncan Watts. He was a researcher at Microsoft, and then he's various academic institutes in the US, and he coined the phrase "big seed marketing" in the end because he was trying to study virality
Mm,
for social media posts. And he was like, the best way to get viral is to just plant lots of seeds. You
yeah,
have to plant lots of seeds. You can do things to make it better, and this is exactly what you're talking about. But even knowing everything, you can never put, you can never bet the house on one thing, right? So you've got to plant many seeds on top of thinking with how you're thinking. So yeah, interesting
yeah,
stuff.
exactly. Yeah, and you can kind of then build on the seeds that work. Essentially, yeah, like
Awesome.
it's like evolution itself, right?
Good line to end on. Mike, thanks. Been a great chat. Appreciate you coming on. Look forward to reading the book when it's out. I should say to people, there are snippets of essays. I don't know how much of those or on what form they'll make it into the book, but if people can't wait, there are essays on the website. And then
Yep.
yeah, keep an eye for when the book drops.
Yeah.
Thanks.
The book's there as basically a quicker, shorter version of reading the 90,000 words of essays. It's
Oh,
a condensed, well optimized version.
back to probably the normal programming schedule. I'm here with Ed. Ed, how you doing?
Thanks, Tom. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Good. Seeing what our new format works like. So should be a good one today. So look, you obviously sat back and you've listened to the interview with Mike. So give me your comments, give me some insight. Like what were your initial thoughts?
I mean, I thought it was a fascinating interview. I've spoken to Mike previously, and I find everything he does really interesting. The memetics and the breaking down of content, I think, is very much at the forefront of marketing right now, especially sort of when you twin that with AI, generative AI, and the capabilities potentially to produce content much quicker than previously, right? And the ability to sort of iterate content both quickly and also at low cost, right? And we're already seeing elements of the memetics, I think, entering into content generation. There's a few groups that I sort of follow and I'm in that talk about generative AI, and a big topic that is shared often in there is what's a good prompt, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about that, that's basically what is your description of your picture or your content, and what does the description need to be? So, and that's really a memetic discussion, right? The sentence that describes it is actually an attempt to describe to attach memes to elements of the image of the content. So I think I think it's a really fascinating time to be thinking about all of that. And as Mike was saying, it does ring true somewhat that content is where the space is being left by platforms, by a lot of the digital platforms. So he sort of brought up the idea that both Meta and Google are sort of pushing people down the be it Performance Max or Meta equivalents like machine learning driven campaigns, and leaving really the content as the only real piece that's left with the marketer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
And
that's a good point. So it's certainly something that we're seeing more and more, right? In terms of,
yeah,
customers moving towards that, also maybe not liking that, some liking it. So yeah, it's a really interesting time.
well, and that's what's interesting with the recent changes to Performance Max, which have very much come at the request of marketers, that they are lifting the lid a bit more on what's being done underneath. So, trying to feed back that information about, or giving you access to the information about what it is using or what Performance Max is targeting, right? So what has it found is working for your brand, but also for your content. So you can do that now at a content level, I believe, as well. So, and that's actually critical in this this mimetic discussion, right? So, imagine you've got a Performance Max campaign which has got a very broad set of creatives in it. Now, it might be that those creatives are working with very different audiences, and you want to extend that to other channels or other forms of marketing. And Performance Max historically has locked all that information in and not given you the ability to do that, right? So it's very much, if we're going to take the cynical view on that, the reason Google does that is that it does want you to get bigger and spend more money on advertising, but it wants you to keep out advertising on Google, right? It doesn't actually want you to go out and buy some billboards. So, yeah. So I think that's a really kind of it's definitely an interesting path that we're taking there, because it's almost like automation came first, and now we're ever so slightly rowing back from it. And really, the question that's left for marketers is, what can you do with that extra information that's coming out? And I think the memetics way of thinking is actually a really good way of encapsulating that idea of how do you test without basically doing, a split test.
Yeah, I thought what was really interesting was the whole mimetics versus memetics conversation. So memetics with an E being about what's being transmitted, and mimetics with an I being about who's doing the transmission. And I thought it was really interesting that originally they've been, well, so historically they've been discussed as very separate, but the whole fact that you need to know both sides of the equation, for this stuff really to work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that kind of combination of ideas is really powerful. But I'd actually go a little bit further and say that there should be kind of a third level added to that, right? So as you say, you've got memetics, you've got like what is being transmitted and who's transmitting it. And then as a final piece, you really have to think about the relationships between the people who are transmitting it as well. And the reason for that is that the copying behaviors, the way that memes are copied is rarely a one-to-one relationship, right? It's often the influence of multiple interactions that causes us to copy someone, right? So a good idea, a classic sort of, I don't know, experiment or cultural idea of copying is the idea of clothing, right? So the fact that we all wear, we're talking about the memes of clothing in the very, very simplest sense here, right? Like trousers and a t-shirt, say, right? Now, the power of copying what someone else is wearing is you kind of go along with the majority a lot more often than you just copy one other person, right? If you saw someone walking around the street in their underpants, you're not going to go like, oh, I'll copy them today, right? Because of all the times that you've seen people in trousers, you've gone, right, I'm going to wear some trousers. So because of that, like these relationships are really important. And one of the reasons they're really important, or like particularly important, I think, in the mimetic sense of the word, or the mimetic world or view of the world, is that some of the fitness or the reason for copying things comes from those relationships in themselves, right? So memetics came from genetics, right? And was this idea that you have some sort of evolutionary fitness for genes, and that's what causes some genes to be more dominant than others, or more prominent, not dominant, than others. Now, in the meme world, or in the cultural world, that's true for some things, but in some cases, a lot of the fitness, as we might call it in inverted commas, or for cultural memes, actually comes from our relationships to other people, right? The fact that they give us similarity to other people. One of the reasons you want to buy the trainers from that new brand you've heard of that your mates have is because you want to be in the group that your mates have, right? And I mean, one of the best experiments that's ever shown this is an experiment by Duncan Watts, who I think he came up in the interview, right? And so he did an experiment a while before he was on his big C things. He went on with he did an experiment into music and getting people to rate music they were hearing, and basically say which music they liked from a load of unknown artists. And what he found was that if he primed people by telling them that other people liked the music, they would give it a higher rating, right? And what that shows is there's no intrinsic quality in liking that music, subscribing to that meme, but what there is there's a cultural fitness from agreeing to other people. And it's the same with all the brands and with a lot of stuff we buy. We make decisions, for this cultural idea of fitness, and therefore what becomes popular is then therefore fit, or therefore has a high level of fitness just because it is popular, right? And
becomes self-fulfilling.
Exactly, it's got this self-fulfilling feedback loop, and that kind of, I think, leans into a lot of what Mike was saying that about correlation and causation, right? That none of these models are measuring causation.
Yeah,
they're measuring correlation, but the kind of the reality of the real world is that you don't need to show why, or a meme doesn't actually have to show itself to be better, to be the one that you assess as being better, and therefore to grow and to become the most prominent meme.
Yeah, got it.
And so that feedback for marketers is really important when it comes to assessing sort of both products and also campaigns, like why campaigns have done well. And virality is the ultimate example of this, right? It's almost impossible. Well, when Duncan Watts presented the results of his music study to sort of A&R and people running record companies, they said that kind of tallies with what we understand. Like, we can tell you if something's not going to do well, right? We can tell you if something's definitely going to be rubbish, but we can't, like, above a certain level, we can't tell you what's going to take off. And that's almost this like viral aspect, that something starts taking off, and then the fact that other people like it, that enough people like it, is what new people who come to it see in it.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. It's I think it's a really interesting lens for marketers. When we're talking about, well, it's this. We rate what works and we rate what doesn't, but we don't take into account the variable nature of success. From take the A&R point of view. There's two bands and they're both good from a subjective point of view. One makes it and one doesn't. In the marketing world, I think we're very good at producing content, and one makes it and one doesn't. And then the analysis is almost, well, that piece of content, what were the attributes of the content that didn't work, and we won't do that again. They're removing the variability. Well, actually, they were both good bits of content, but one just got, one got that feedback loop by very nature, so it became more successful because of how it was being shared, how it was being consumed, not necessarily because the difference in attributes of those contents of the content. And I think the A&R guys understand that. Maybe I'm not sure whether that always gets taken into account when producing content in the marketing world.
I think it definitely doesn't, right? And there is part of the problem is that there's a lifespan for content, right? You can't recycle old content, or and maybe that's not quite true, right? That you can't recycle old content, but in general, you don't want to recycle old content, almost because the internet will do it for you, right? It's a lot of things that go viral and memes, and you see videos like that will go viral, but they might be like 5-10 years old nowadays. They get found out on the internet, and suddenly they're viral, and nothing's changed in them, and the world hasn't changed since enough to justify that. It's literally just the combination of connections that they get shared across makes it go viral.
Yeah. Cool. That was a good insight, a good wrap up on the conversation with Mike. Any more before we bring it to a close, or is that a good place to draw a line?
No, I think that's a good place to draw a line under it. I just think, yeah, kind of adding that extra little bit in of where these people are sharing it kind of can really help you think about what your kind of how you're using these memes in your marketing, right? And marketers, that shouldn't be alien to a lot of marketers, right? A lot of marketers have messages that they target to different audiences for the same product, right? They have like slightly different concepts that they might be trying to push, or value, or values and benefits of their products that they know matter to different audiences. And they're probably already thinking like, okay, where do these audiences actually get their information from as well, right? If you're targeting, if you've got a message that you want to get to 16 to 24-year-olds, you would target that maybe on TikTok and run your TikTok marketing campaign that way, and then use a different marketing campaign for your Meta or your Instagram targeting, because it's just because it is a different you're targeting a different group of people with a different message. So you're combining that meme and the memetics, right? The what are you sharing and who's sharing it already into your thinking, and the kind of the memetic framework is really just a way of organizing that and getting as much information as possible out of each of those kind of little trials or experiments that you're running.
Yeah, love it. Great. Well, look, thank you. Let's give it a wrap there. So, yeah, thank you for listening. I hope the interview with Mike was useful, and as always, it's great to kind of get Ed's analysis on this, because I think the behavioural science undertones for a lot of this is super important. And as Mike said, there's, especially with this topic, there's a lot of crossover. So, yeah, hopefully that was of use. I guess technically this is a meme in the context of the podcast, so make sure that you share this meme, this podcast, with people that you think it might find it useful. If you haven't already, like and subscribe so you don't miss when the next one's released. And we will see you on the next episode of The Grapevine. Ed, thanks for joining. See you again next time.
Yes, definitely. I'll be here. Don't worry.
Good stuff. And yeah, we'll see you again soon. Cheers.